Federal government is facing calls from within its own ranks to consider temporarily reducing the fuel excise to save motorists at the Bowser. For more on this, let's bring in Federal Nationals MP Anne Webster, who has contacted the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, asking him to look at what can be done to reduce the burden of petrol prices. And thank you for joining us. Do you think that the fuel excise should be dropped or cut?
Look, I think it's something that it needs to be addressed. It needs to be at least looked at, which is what I asked the Treasurer last week. The reality is, I've done several thousand kilometres this last week around my electorate, filled my tank twice. It was $500. Not everyone can afford that, but the reality is that this is something that is occurring at the petrol Bowser because of global conditions. Those global conditions are causing instability in terms of oil access, probably more the price than the access. We rely on several countries for our fuel imports. And ultimately, I think it probably gives us cause to reflect again on our manufacturing sovereignty and our ability to, find our own oil.
You've asked the Treasurer to look into it. Realistically, how much could you cut it back by?
Well, I think that is definitely a financial and economic issue. And, I paid $2.22 at the Bowser for diesel this week. Even if we cut the fuel excise in half and took off 22 cents, that's really not going to make much of a dent. And I think that we also need to be really cautious about, providing band-aid solutions for something that is actually a global issue that we need to work through. I am concerned that if fuel prices continue to rise, that transport, freight, products on our shelves are going to continue to rise as well. Obviously, inflation taking a hit. But honestly, Australia is positioned so well right now compared to our companies, OECD countries. Australia is sitting very well on every level economically in terms of inflation. So I think this is something that needs to be considered for a long-term strategy. And the other point I'd make, Danica, is that fuel excise funds our roads. And if there is one issue that comes up on every person's lips when I go around the electorate, it is roads. And the fact is that we are a relatively small country, 25 million people. In the global scheme of things, we're a relatively small country. We have vast distances. And to fund our roads is a huge expense. The government has levels. And so we need to be really cautious about the steps that we take that could hinder that continued development.
Well, there has been concerns about the potential impact on roads funding. There's been other suggestions, perhaps to release more fuel reserves as a backup option. Do you think that is better placed?
Well, Australia is looking at supporting the global initiative, the 1.7 million oil barrels that we have on reserve in the US. We have, that's part of the mix. And again, these are decisions that need to be made at higher levels of government than myself. But I know that we're looking at those issues and, we're part of a global solution here. And I think, in the interim, Australians are passionately supporting Ukraine. And in that passionate supporting of Ukraine, we also carry some cost for the decisions that are being made. I believe the right decisions to cease buying oil from Russia. I mean, in Australia, we only buy 1.5%, or Ampol have. But, it does have an ongoing effect. There are repercussions for the decisions we make. And sometimes we just need to make moral decisions that might impact our hip pocket for the short term. But in the long term, we're part of global solution making.
Anne Webster, we have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks so much.